This is what my bees see when you go into them. And then I smell like ode to smoke because the smoker smokes me too. So it's a good thing my husband likes campfire smokes. So thank you for coming today. I know there's so many things going on out there today. There's much exciting things now that we have spring and summer and whatever, but I appreciate you coming in. And hopefully you'll learn stuff today, and I won't talk too much because I got lots of stories and lots of fun. And I have been studying the bees and now working with them. Studying the first year, and then the second year I got my first hive, and I now have 5. So my foray into this world started with, like I said, with a year of study, because I'd been in Boston to see family, and I went into a hive on a rooftop of a home in a very city area, and it's very hilly, and it was Jamaica Plains, Boston. And the houses are on different levels because of the hills. And this woman had a flat roof, and she had hives on the roof. And she said, "Do you want to come in?" And I was like, "Yeah." And that was the moment, because there was no turning around then for me, because I just kept going and learning more about them. And they're my teachers. They're my absolute teachers. Every time I think I'm confident with what I do, they say, "No, you're not," and I have to figure something else out. So, yes, you can call yourself an expert at some point, but I'm nowhere near there. But I know a lot about them, and I'm really jazzed about it. It's become my new passion, if you can't tell. So today, we're going to be talking about a lot of things. I'm going to talk about the tools of beekeeping, the castes, which are the roles of each of the caste of bees, the pollination, and communication in the hive, which is so fascinating, and about swarms and about mites. So those are the topics I'm going to be covering. So as you saw me coming in with my smoker and my full gear, I didn't have my gloves on. I believe they're either made out of cowhide or I believe goat maybe. You need them nice and thick because they can still sting you through the glove, and I still have a couple of stingers on here. But that's kind of makes it a little hard to feel the things that you're doing when you're in there, because you're trying to not squish bees as you're picking up the frames and such, but it's really essential. You see those folks out there on those videos wearing no mask, no veil, and no gloves. Gloves, okay, if you want, you're going to get stung. I've been stung multiple times. But the veil, they go for holes. So they go for your nose and they go for your eyes. And if they sting you in the eye, in the pupil, you will go blind. So those people are really do a disservice to the community by doing those kind of videos and people thinking, "Oh yeah, you can go in and you can do this." And let me tell you, because I'm anxious when I get into the hive, when I was first starting, I was clumsy, and they know clumsy, they know fear. I'm finally to the point now where I can get in there and they're calm unless they're aggravated about something, like they want to swarm or they don't have a queen. Then they are angry on their own without me being the reason. But you don't always know that. So we've got the smoker, and that's another challenge that I've mostly overcome. You want this smoker to last for an hour while you're in the hive, or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, because sometimes it takes me that long now that I have 5 hives. And I can't get it open. So I start the fire usually with some newspaper, and then this is just a funny piece. So my mentor told me toilet paper rolls and paper towel rolls are good to help start the fire. So my lovely friends keep coming to me with bags of toilet paper rolls. I don't need any more right now. But it makes it easier to start the fire with something that's a little light, and then I start putting in different types of wood. I try to get the lightest punk type wood. That lasts longer. But sometimes I've had to stop in the middle of an inspection and relight my fire just because that's what happens. So what you're going for smoke. And you don't want it to be a hot smoke, you want it to be a cool smoke. So some people use pine needles and such. I haven't found that to make much of a difference. So what you do, and I'm sure you've seen this in some of the videos, is you smoke just the top and the entrance when you get in, and then hopefully don't need to use it again. It's sitting there. If they start getting aggravated, or if I'm trying to move a 40-pound box back on top of the hive and they're trying to scurry out, you can smoke them on the corners to try and keep them in the hive and not squish them, because I hate that feeling when I put the thing down and I hear a crunch, or I see half a bee outside dead, the bottom half is crushed. I really hate that. These are the hive tools I use. It's one of the things we're going to talk about is propolis. They bring in propolis from trees, wounds on trees, and that they seal up their home with the propolis. It's like glue. It is like a glue. I'm surprised we haven't replicated it commercially, because it doesn't come off. That's what this is, also propolis, and it gets all over everything, and you can't get it off usually unless you really, really scrape it. But they seal up holes in their hive on the inside. Like if there's a crack in the wood, they seal it up. If a mouse comes in and they kill the mouse, they can't drag it out, so they propolize it. So it's kind of, they're just, one of the many amazing functions that they do. So then we have the suit, as you saw. I originally started wearing just a veil, but there was a gap on both of my arms where I wore a thick shirt, and one day they were really mad at me. And honest, I don't know how they know it, but I had stings all around both arms, like totally around each arm. That day I went online and I bought a suit because that was pretty miserable. So that's my gloves, as I showed you. I have some samples of this over here, of the honeycomb. This is what they make. This is them. This isn't me. I'll show you how we start as a beekeeper, but this is totally them. They're all in a hexagon shape, and they make bigger ones for the drones. I'll be talking about that in a little bit. This is a box, and this is a medium. A lot of people use deeps. That's a deep frame there. I'll show you that in a little bit. I used mediums because these are 40 pounds when they are filled with brood and honey. So I've been bulking up, trying to make sure I'm able to lift them, because sometimes I'm lifting them from up here if they've got boxes underneath. Sometimes I'm lifting from down here if I'm pulling it off their stand. So then there's 10 frames per box. Some people run 8-frame boxes, but I'm really not sure why. I haven't figured that out yet. But these are the frames. I'll pass these around. The yellow-black is just a preference. I really like the black because you can see things a little bit better, like their eggs that are really hard to identify. But we put these in the hive, and these come pre-waxed. I buy them pre-waxed. But you can actually pop the frame out, and if you put this in the hive like this, popped out, that I can't get, use your imagination, they actually create the comb just like this. They'll just make the whole thing on the frame. But it makes it hard to manage because it's wobbly. It falls out sometimes when you're trying to pick it up. Some people will let them do that, but also it's a lot of work for them to make this wax. So we like to give them a little bit of a start. So I'm going to pass this around just so you see how light it is. It's just made out of a pine, and then that's a plastic foundation with the wax on the outside. So I'll get into inspecting later. And we have a screen board. I didn't bring in an inner cover and telescoping outer cover, which really aren't essential to anything you need to know at this point. So let's see. Important traits for beekeepers. If anybody wants to become a beekeeper, these are really things you need to either acquire or have. A lot of patience. It takes a long time to look through a hive when you're new. Like I said, I've been in the hive sometimes 5 hours because I have so many things to look at and so many things to think about as I'm doing the inspection. Curiosity. There's so much to know about bees, and they don't follow any rules. They can make up their own rules as they go along, and they're responding to their nature. And the joke is, I've heard this from many beekeepers, the same joke. You ask 10 beekeepers a question, you get 12 answers. And I say, it's really 20 answers, because it's not a fast and accurate science. We have to, I call myself a bee-haver, not a beekeeper, because I have them, and I want to take care of them in the best way possible. They are considered livestock. We have to get an apiary registration every year. We have to send in a registration to the state, and it's $5 a hive. It's not a big deal. There's also a Lake County bee inspector. There's an inspector in each county who has to come out to inspect your colony before you try to sell bees, because they want to make sure that your colonies are healthy. And I did get inspected, and I passed with flying colors, so I was happy about that, because I've got too many bees right now. So we also have flexibility. You have to be able to think on your feet, which is kind of hard when you're surrounded by 40,000 stinging bees, to try and think about, oh gosh, what did they tell me to do? What frame should be out there? What frame should be in here? And appreciation. They are teaching me. Every time I go in, I learn something new. There's such an amazing, sophisticated community, and you'll be knowing more about that as we go along. Okay, this is really awesome. So this is an egg developing. The queen will come and lay, I'll get into that more a little bit later. The queen lays between 1,300 and 1,500 eggs a day during the peak of the season. And this is what happens once the egg is laid.
Hatches into a larva. Those newly hatched larvae swim around their cells, feeding on a liquid food that nurse bees secrete for them. Then their head and their legs start to differentiate as they transform into pupae. That same pupation process seen from above with varroa mites running around in cells. Next, the tissue reorganizes in their body and the pigment slowly develops in their eyes. In the last step, their skin shrivels up and they sprout hair.
So this is typically how any egg develops. The queen lays the egg, and they're in the cell for 1 to 3 days. And then within the 3rd to 4th day, they hatch into larvae, which look like, fly larvae, any larvae you would see. And then it becomes a pupa. It actually creates a cocoon, and then they get capped with wax. And they stay in that capped wax cocoon. For the queen, it's 16 days. For the worker, it's 21. And for a drone, it's 24. So as I'm looking at the frames, that's what I'm looking for. What do I have here? Do I have capped brood? Do I have capped drones? Do I have queen emerging? Because that can be not a good thing sometimes if you have a queen already and they're trying to make another, because that usually means they're going to swarm. Okay, so these are the 3 different types of bees. The queen, look at how much bigger she is than the worker and the drone. The drones are like fat. They're easy to identify in the hive because they're so much bigger than the worker. And the queen has an elongated body because it's her tail end that goes into that crevice of the comb to lay the egg. And that's what she does all day, all night, I don't know, a lot. So the queen is the heart and soul of the colony. She's the reason for nearly everything the rest of the colony does. They can't, well, I have written here they can't survive without her, but that's not true. They can survive without her for a time. They have to have a new queen to be able to replace themselves because they don't live very long. And if you get beyond, say, a month and you don't have queen laying new eggs, the hive is going to start to fail. But there's ways that we can get around that by adding brood from another colony to a failing colony. So the queen serves 2 purposes. She has pheromones that regulate the unity of the colony. That's one of their ways of communicating. And then to lay eggs, as I said, 1,500 to 3,000 eggs a day at 30-second intervals. The colonies may make several queen cells. They actually practice making queen cells first. You actually see these peanut-shaped shells that start happening, and that's okay. They can practice all they want, but if I'm in there and I see larva or an egg in that cell, or God forbid, it's already capped, that means they either have swarmed or they are going to swarm. So that's something that you may or may not want to see depending on what's going on with the colony. So the first thing, this is really interesting. The queen, right now I have a colony that must have 15 queen cells. They're a big colony. In the smaller colonies, I'd have 4. On a queenless, I did a split. And so the first queen that emerges, will then use the stinger that she has, that she only uses to kill other queens, and she will emerge from her cell and go and sting all the other queen cells through the side and kills her sisters. Or if they emerge at the same time, they have a battle to the death. So it sounds like a horror movie, right? But there can only be one queen in the hive because they're the master communicators. They're the ones that create the unity for the colony. That queen then, after she comes out of her, emerges from her cell, walks around the hive for 2 to 3 days, and then she flies up in the air and is met by multiple drones in an area in the air. I don't know that anybody's even ever filmed it, but there probably is somewhere. But she is mated by multiple drones up in the air, and then the drones that made her die, and she comes back to the hive. Sometimes she goes back up again, sometimes she just stays in the hive forever, depending on how much, I don't know how she knows, but that insemination that occurs is for the rest of her life, which can be between 1 and 4 years. She has a retinue to see to her every need because she doesn't leave the hive. She doesn't go out. She doesn't go to get food. The retinue, which is the workers, they feed her, they groom her, they take away her waste, they do everything for her because her only job is to lay eggs and to communicate to the colony. They are marked with a different color for every year. I think that was 2 years ago. This year is red, and I have to figure out how to mark them. It's another challenge. So the worker bees, they call them house bees because they mostly take care of the inner workings of the house, of the hive. As soon as they chew their way out of this wax cap, and I was hoping I could find a picture of one because it's so fun to see a little bee face chewing its way out of the cap, but I couldn't find one. But as soon as they make their way out of that, they turn around and they clean it because that queen needs places to lay eggs. So they go around and clean cells for up to 3 days. Undertaking. The hive is one of the most sterile and clean environments in the world. They will take a bee that has died or an ant that's come in and they've killed, and they pull them out of the hive. I actually have a video I couldn't attach to this because it was my own personal one, and I'm not that tech savvy. But I actually have a video of last year. I had the hive open, and this hornet, bald-faced European hornet, this big, it got in the hive, and I'm like, oh no, what am I going to do? And I managed to turn on my phone, but I'm shaking like this. And they actually, she dropped down into the hive, and the girls got her and got her up to the edge of the hive, pulling her out, like multiple ones around her. And she almost got out, and she dropped back down again. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I should help them or not. And then they got her back up and kicked her out. It was the coolest thing. They're amazing. They're so strong. Working in the nursery. So the worker bees feed the baby larvae up to 1,300 times a day. And they feed them a mix of pollen, honey, and royal jelly. So when you're looking at the brood frame, you want to be sure to see a brood pattern here of eggs, larvae, and capped brood. Should be all on the same frame. And in the corners, you'll see pollen and nectar or honey. And they feed the combination of the nectar and the honey or pollen and royal jelly that they excrete from their head, I believe it is. Yeah, a gland in their head, yep. And then the retinue, as I mentioned before, is the girls attending to the queen. So this is a queen, and see the bees all around her like this. And sometimes that's how you know, if you don't have a marked queen, sometimes that's how you help identify it. If you look for one fairly large bee that is being attended, kept around, circled around her, they also sometimes try and hide her. It's hard to find the queen. She doesn't like light, so as soon as you pull the frame out, she usually scatters to the other side of the frame. And if she's not, especially if she's not marked, and 2 of my marks came off 2 of my queens in the last year, so good luck with that, finding her. Oh, let me do this. This is another fascinating thing that they accomplish. So this is another function that they perform, and it's for multiple reasons. So I'll show you this, and then I'll talk about that. So you'll notice that their butts are in a certain angle, and they have a gland in their backside called a Nasanov gland, and they are fanning the chemical coming from that, the pheromone from that to this. This is probably the end of the day, and they're calling the foragers home. The foragers know they're home by the smell, by the pheromone. Storing nectar and pollen, that's from 12 to 18 days of a new bee. They will meet the foragers at the front of the hive, and they will exchange the nectar that the bee got from the flowers by their proboscis. The proboscis is their tongue that is like a hollow instrument almost. And I'll see them at the entrance of the hive exchanging, head to head, exchanging that nectar. That nectar gets mixed with an enzyme in the bee's body, and then they tip it into the honeycomb cells, where they fan it for 5 days, and that reduces the water content and it turns it into honey. Their fanning also creates the environment in the colony that keeps the environment to 93 to 95 degrees, whether it's winter or summer. Now, I help that as a beekeeper by using R5 insulation on the outside and a couple of other tricks, but you want to help them. You don't want them to use all their energy to be doing that, but that warmth comes from their fanning of their wings, and they ball in a cluster in the winter. They're like this most of the time, and if you get a warm day, they will go up to the food, and if you also might see in the winter, you might see, if it gets to be a nice day, bees going out, and they don't poop except when they're outside the hive. So in the winter, you see a hive and you see snow and you see yellow on the snow. You know they've been coming out to do their duty because they won't do it in the hive. They're also master builders. This is so cool. I was wishing I had a better picture of this because it's one of the funnest things I see. I'll pick a frame up, and as I'm doing that, I see these bees holding on to each other, 4 or 5, 10 maybe. They are holding on to each other by their wings and their arms and their, any way they can hold on in a string, and they call it festooning. I love that word. I like to think they're having fun. And they think that's how they measure, because they are master architects and builders. They're engineering gymnasts. They don't really know for sure, but that's what they think that they're measuring. Bee space, the reason that this hive is set up the way it is, it was Langstroth, I'm going to say it was 1859, who discovered this. This is bee space. This is 3/8 of an inch. Any more of that, they make comb that's not going to work. It gets too bulked out. And any less than that, they won't make any comb at all. They also, sometimes if you have too much space, they'll also get it propolised places that shouldn't be. So they like 3/8 of an inch. And if that way, they will make comb that is flat enough, and like on this hive, in this one, you can see it flat enough to be of use. And this is a drone frame. I'll talk about this in a little bit, but this is actually one of the bigger frames. This is a deep box, which can be 90 pounds when it's filled with brood and honey. So I don't want to lift 90 pounds. I only have one, and that was because that was one of the first ones I got. I'll explain this to you later, but this is what a brood pattern kind of looks like. I have it in here because it was frozen, but I'll get to that in a little bit. So the builders excrete the wax from their abdomen to build the comb for honey and pollen and eggs into perfect hexagons. Guard bees that's one of the last ones they do, is they're 18 to 21 days. And these are all the workers. These are all the females. The males don't do anything. Sorry, guys. Guard bees stay at the entrance and by now have an authoritative amount of venom to ward off other predators. And let me tell you, I've experienced that authoritative amount of venom. They can repeatedly sting insects and other animals. I was really worried when I first got them because there were 3 baby raccoons that were on my hives in one evening, and I called my mentor and I'm like, what do I do? What do I do? She goes, the girls will take care of them. Don't worry about it. They never came back. But if you get stuck, their stinger goes into your skin, and they can't pull it back out again because it's barbed. So if you do get a bee sting, remember to get that stinger out as fast as possible, because when they sting you, that stinger and some of their gut comes out and is left on your arm. And part of it is a muscle that will continue to push the venom into your system, even after they've gone off and died. So take the stinger off as fast as you can. And I've learned to do that, and the stings haven't been quite as bad. So their last job, foraging will be her last job, and this one is rough on the bees. In this picture, you can see how ragged the wings are. Those wings are very fragile. I have a couple of dead honeybees over in that container, and you can see how worn they are as compared to newer bees that look really pristine. So she is now out collecting pollen and nectar. One of the fun things that we do, our hives are in our backyard, and we have a patio enclosure. And I love to sit out there and watch in the morning and in the evening. At about 10 o'clock, they leave the hive, and about 4 o'clock, they come back. And when they're doing that, the bees will come out of the hive and go straight up and then out, and they go for up to 2 miles around, or 3, 5, whatever, around, and collect their honey and nectar. But the new ones, they're going out for the first time, and maybe they'll do this for a few days. We'll do what they call orientation flights. And it's like a dance, because you see these bees going in a circle, and then in a bigger circle, and then in a bigger circle, and then be back to the small one. What they're doing is orienting themselves by where the sun is to where the hive is. I've got 5 hives in my yard. From what I've been told, they all go back to their own hive. They don't go to the other hives. So it's amazing. And so you might see that in the morning and in the evening, but it's like I said, it's like a dance. You just see them doing this. It's so cool. They can carry their own weight in honey and nectar, and they also collect the propolis, which I talked about before. So this is their last job. They can only last in this for so long. They get chilled coming back, they get eaten by a bird, or they're just unable to fly, so they work diligently until the end for the good of the hive. So the drones, God bless them, they are the unfertilized egg, and that's what this frame is unfertilized eggs. So they're bigger than the normal size. And I have a green frame because I don't know how they know it, but their hexagons are bigger. And if I put a green frame in there with a bigger hexagon, the queen lays the eggs in that bigger hexagon. And since their only role is to mate with the queen, and they don't mate with their own queen, they're usually laid 10% of the colony. We don't really need all them. So as a matter of integrated pest management, which you gardeners are all familiar with, as part of the mite control, we have a drone frame, and once it's filled like this one is, we take it out and we put it in the freezer, and we kill the drones, yes, but we kill the mites. So this is a really good non-chemical way of getting rid of the mites, because the mites only go in the drone cells. They're bigger, the cells are bigger, and the female can lay up to 5 to 6 eggs per drone cell. And the drone, in its capped form, the mite can just grow and get bigger, and then as soon as the drone emerges, so do all those mites. And this has been very successful for my mentor. She's the one who I know other people are doing it too. But that way we do this, and I'm getting ahead of myself on the mite control, but we do this and we do two chemical treatments in the fall. But you'll find other beekeepers that will do chemical treatments every month based on an alcohol wash or a sugar roll. They told me I need to take a jar and put 300 bees in it and put alcohol in it, and then you check to see how many drones there are. And my first question was, how do I count 300 bees? But it's not, it's about a half a cup of bees. And I don't want to kill a half a cup of bees, And also, the most scientific beekeeper, Randy Oliver, anybody who's interested in scientific-based research about bees, it's in my credits at the end, my citations. It's scientificbeekeeping.org, I believe it is. And he has taken 2 people doing the same sugar roll or alcohol roll, and getting 2 different counts on the same hive, and there's just no way you can equate it with what you need to do. So my mentor doing this has been 90 to 100% overwintering. which is the biggest time when you're starting, the colony starts again in the spring. It's the biggest time that the mites can be a problem. I got ahead of myself on that. I have another frame on it. I'll talk about that more. So in the fall, the drones get kicked out of the hive because they are a drain on the hive. So they are kicked out by September, usually October maybe. But like I said, bees don't follow rules. Last winter, I had a queen that was failing, and the bees figured it out. So they developed 3 queen cells. And I called my mentor and I said, I think I have 3 queens. And she came by. By the time we got back into the hive, one of the queens had emerged, and it was like a can opener. She opened the shell like that, and the other 2 were crushed. And she said, okay, we probably have a virgin queen in this hive. Let's find her. So we're looking and looking and looking, and she said she found her. And as a virgin, she's smaller. She doesn't have that elongated body that I showed you before. Really tiny. I don't know how she found her, but we realized that she was practicing. She was putting her little end into the cells. She wasn't laying eggs, but she was putting it in. And she said, I think she's mated. Well, weirdly, in October, this was October 5th, because most of the mites are dead most of the drones are dead by now. You know, we thought, okay, well, we'll see what happens. So like 2 weeks later, I went in and she was mated. She had 4 frames of brood, 4 full frames of brood. So she was well mated. And she's still a good layer. This spring, I've had to split her hive 3 times because she lays so many eggs, and they were getting so aggressive, I couldn't walk outside my house because as they get tight and ready to swarm, they can be pretty mean. But I split her once, they were still mean. I split it again, and they're calm as could be. And the ones that I took away, so I left my queen in this hive. I called her Cub because my first queen was Tiger. So Cub is in this hive. I leave that queen in this hive along with some resources, and I take 2 boxes, making sure I have eggs and larvae and a cat brood and some nurse bees. So I not only I just literally lift frames out of a hive that have those things on them and put them in another hive. And then within a few days, they start developing queen cells. And then within a month, they should have a mated queen. You know, there's things that can happen that won't make that, but that's how you do a split. So I split that one twice already. She's a good layer. And talking about the pollinators, because that was what I said for what I was going to call this class. It's amazing. The bees they call them supreme pollinators. They have flower fidelity. So a bee will fly to an area where there's flowers, and the bees will go on every single flower, take all the nectar, take all the pollen. They won't move to another set of flowers until that's all done. And because of that, they are really helpful even in plants that are self-pollinating. They found, this was an Ohio State study, they indicated that there's more fruit and higher quality fruit when the blooms are visited by bees, because it helps ensure fruit production, because there's more movement between the flowers, even in the self-pollinating plants and orchards. So they have this straw-like proboscis, which I talked about, to suck nectar from the center of the flower, and the pollen gathers on their body. And I love this part too, because they call it pollen pants. If you've ever seen a bee flying and you see these 2 little things on the back of their legs that are colored, what happens is they're in the flower and they get pollen on them, and they are very clean, so they clean off their body and they somehow stick the pollen down into their pollen buckets or pollen pants. There's a picture on that on the next slide. Sometimes I've seen colors I've seen red, I've seen purple, I've seen orange, I see yellow. It's really fun to watch. And there's actually some charts that you can find that'll tell you what it is likely they're bringing in at what time of the year, what kind of pollen. One thing I didn't put on here, I always wondered how you knew if you had orange blossom honey, because I'm thinking these bees are going out for miles and miles, right? Well, here it is, that's the flower fidelity part too. If your bees are in an orange grove, they're only having the orange blossom because they will only go for so far. And other places have fields and orchards and things like that. You can only call it that if you know for sure that that's the case, that's pretty much all they got. They will collect pollen from the air, but it's not as nutritious, so it's only in desperation that they would do that. And let me tell you, Ohio is full of pollen. I have frames of pollen I don't know what I'm going to do with because they packed in too much. So all their food comes from flowers. The nectar of 5 million flowers equals 1 pint of honey. So that teaspoon of honey you put in your tea, that's a lot of work for that, right? The foragers unload the nectar. I talked about that, and that it's thickened to honey, and the pollen is stored near the brood and mixed with honey to feed them. Otherwise, they don't really use the pollen. This is a frame of it's all pollen coming from different sources, because you see orange and yellow and darker color there. These are pollen pans or pollen buckets. So they're really fun to watch. If you see bees, look, because I think other bee cultures do the same thing. Okay, this is another fascinating video about how they communicate, one of the methods of communicating.
Honeybees have some fascinating abilities, among them being able to communicate by performing a unique dance. It informs hive mates where a newly discovered food source is located. Every cycle of this waggle dance roughly describes the shape of the figure 8. Let's rewind and look in more detail. The bee only waggles on the part of its route, a straight line, indicated here by the waved line. The secret lies in the direction of the straight run, or to be more precise, in the angle between the straight run and the perpendicular, which in this case is the food is available.
Sorry, I don't know what happened there.
If the angle is 60 degrees to the right, they'll be flying 60 degrees to the right of the sun.
So this is only one method of communication that they have. I talked before about them fanning the pheromones, but also they have pips and squeaks and vibrations and so many more ways we don't even know. I love when I go in a hive and I see bees head to head, and it's not that they're not exchanging nectar because their proboscises aren't out, but their antennae are intertwined. And I wish I could just put a microphone there and hear what they're saying, but they don't speak our language. So overall, the communication methods used by bees are a real testament to the complexity and sophistication of these fascinating insects. Swarms. So swarms are a natural occurrence. This is what they do in nature to expand. It's a natural activity. As bee havers, we don't want them to leave because we don't want to lose our honey too, but sometimes it's going to happen anyway. The queen communicates that, remember I mentioned before that a couple of my hives were aggressive. That's usually coming from the motions of the queen. The rest of the hive is hearing from her by her pheromones that she passes along to the bees that are close by her, like a bucket brigade, they describe it. So she says, it's time to go, and she and half the bees take off, and they usually go 2 miles away or so from the hive itself. And if you see a swarm, they are not aggressive because they are in existence mode. They're balled up in a tree usually, or an empty place, and they are getting hungry because they're used to being fed frequently or eating frequently. And their guard bees start going out afield and trying to find a safe place for them to lay. So then they come back and they communicate to the hive that, okay, we found a place, and the whole group will take off and get their new home. But the problem is that sometimes they starve before they get there. Sometimes they're too thirsty before they get there, and it's not always a given that they're going to exist. So then the hive that stays home, as I mentioned before, like I do with a split, they'll recognize that she is gone within the hour, and they'll start using usually the signs of a swarm are seeing queen cells that are getting more built up. So they'll take the new cells, or the cells that they've already started building up, and really work on them and get them built and capped and ready to develop a new queen. So the new queen will hopefully emerge within 16 days from that, and then she'll take her mating flight, and then hopefully within a month from that time that the other queen left, she should be laying eggs. And that's what you hope for. But, she can get lost on her mating flight. She could get eaten by a bird. We had a peregrine falcon in our backyard the other day, and I don't know if it was coming after the bees or the birds, but they do. Jim says sometimes I'm out at the hive, and he'll see them all around me, and he'll see the birds going by, took another one, took another one. The birds do like the bees too. Okay, so this is our favorite topic, not the mites. They started in, I believe it was the 80s. They made their way over here from Asia. In Asia, they're not a problem because they have other predators. They have a defense mechanism for the bees. Have already developed a defense mechanism for the mites. But our poor bees don't. And it was part of the hive collapse issues that we heard about in the 80s and 90s. So we've learned somewhat how to deal with them, but they're pretty ugly little things. And this is them on a larva. And I don't know if you saw in that developing one, I meant to point that out, that you could see the mite running around the little drone body. So the females lay the eggs in the drone cells, as I said before, and feeds on the fat body of the larva. And then once they escape out of the they've emerged with the drone, they can feed on the other honeybees. The problem is not only weakening the hive, but because they're weakening the hive, they are much more liable to get other diseases like American foul brood, or many of the other things that the bees are susceptible to. If you have a strong hive, you're not as likely to get those kind of diseases, but these things really do weaken the hive. There's a lot of methods to treat, as I mentioned before, but none of them are 100%. But I'm trying to follow the person that seems to be doing a good job, my mentor, as I mentioned before. But I'm sure you find other methods out there that could be as effective, but it's something that is always talked about. You might also have heard that they developed a vaccine for American foul brood, which is a really nasty disease that if the hive gets American foul brood, you have to burn your equipment. It's that bad and that difficult you can't survive a colony with that. They have to, I think they have to bury it 4 feet deep, burn it, and cover it up. That's how bad it is. They've developed a vaccine, and I'm thinking, how are they going to put a needle in a little bee? But apparently it's something they eat. So hopefully that'll help our colonies that way, that we can be able to get, then the queen is resistant to American foul brood, and then her babies will be resistant too. So hopefully that's a coming thing that will be really helpful for the bee community. So as I've kind of gone through this a little bit already, as I'm going into the hive, I'm looking for resources. I'm looking for honey, pollen, and nectar. Honey is capped and it's flatter. I wish I had brought a sample of that. I should have. The capped honey is flatter, and as I said, usually you might pick up a frame and you'd see a whole frame of, you really like to see this, a whole frame of nectar or capped honey, because that'll be what gives me the honey in the long run. But you definitely want to see it, especially as we were going into winter last year. We put the bees to bed with 60 to 75 pounds of honey and or sugar. Each frame is considered 3 pounds if it's filled with honey or nectar. And then I figure out how many of those I have, and then I add sugar cakes to the top of the hive to help them make it through the winter. There's nothing you wouldn't want to open your hive in the spring and find out that they died of starvation. My cakes were barely touched. We go overboard doing the sugar thing, but I'd rather go overboard than not. Sugar's fairly cheap. Then bias is considered when you see the capped brood like this, and you usually see the capped brood, then you see the larva, and then you see the eggs around the most outer edge. She usually starts laying in the middle, and as they go around, she put that, you can see the eggs coming out here. You want to look for the queen, but if you don't see your queen, it's okay. As long as you see eggs, she's been there within the last 3 days. Although I really always like to see my queen. And then the drones are 10%, and IPM, we pull them for integrated pest management. And I talked about the signs of supersedure cells. That's the same thing as a queen cup, really. It's just kind of where it is on the frame. The supersedure cells mean that they are trying to make a new queen because their old queen isn't doing well, or that they're getting ready to swarm because they know they need more room. And the queen cups are just kind of a common thing you see. And I'm looking for signs of disease and general health. And the hives are livestock, as I said. So I think that's about the end of what I got here, right? Nope, I got others. Oh, these are my citations. I've got two pages of them. I don't know if anybody wants any information from this. I'll leave this one up for a little bit, and then I'll flip to the other one. But in the meantime, I know I gave you a lot of information. There's a lot to say about the bees. Any questions?
You've been mentioning a mentor a lot. How would, if I wanted to get into beekeeping, how would I get a mentor?
Talk to me. Seriously, we'll talk because I have a very good mentor. I have a couple of them now because it just is better if you have a couple of them. And it's also good to have community resources. My one mentor is in Cleveland Heights, the other one's in Fairport Harbor. And the Fairport Harbor one is helpful because if I need to sell the bees, if I want to sell a nuke, she knows who needs them, or we can put it out online. We can do. There's a lot of resources, but you do really need a good mentor because I could have never gotten through this without that.
On an average week or a month, how much time do you spend taking care of the bees?
In the summer, we actually go away for the winter, and it's not a problem. I lock them up. You don't go in them because you're going to break the propolis. You're going to get them cold. And the brood die from cold. So we don't go into the hive for the first time until it's above 60 degrees, 50 to 60 degrees. They actually start flying at about 40, but we don't want to crack that hive open because the babies start on the winter solstice. The queen starts laying on winter solstice. She takes a brood break from November till then. She doesn't lay any brood, but then she starts January. What's winter solstice? January something, right? 22nd. So she's laying January 22nd, and I didn't go into the hive this year until April. And then in the summer, I go in as often as I need to. There's other people that'll argue about, because they all argue, but they'll tell you, try not to go in. But as a newbie, I need to go in as often as I need to go in, and I'm okay with that. I mean, that's something that people would tell me, don't go in except, if I'm probably next year, I might be better at it, I'll probably go in once a week. Because it's usually 7 or 8 days you're going to see changes. You're going to like, I'll need to know, did that queen emerge? Are they, do they still have a queen? Do they still, is everything okay? And then when I go in, I'm slow because I'm new. I'm getting faster. But it honestly, there's been days I've been out there for 5 hours, but that's my stupidity because I won't stop and take a break and do it another day. I just want to keep going, it's so fascinating to me. I just keep at it, but it's a good hobby.
What's your favorite thing about owning bees and what's your least favorite thing about them?
The least favorite's really easy, the stings. They kiss it, they call them kisses. My favorite thing is getting to know this amazing society. I mean, they're insects. My grandson, he's 11 years old, but he's really smart, and he said, their brains must have like all the wrinkles in the world, because how do they know what to do? And it's a foreign thing for us, and I get excited. Like after I leave the hive, I'm like, I can't wait to go back in again because I want to see what they're going to do. So I guess that's complicated, but answer.
So you started in 2021. When are you going to have enough honey that you can eat?
That's a good question. I don't know. A part of the reason, and I'm forgiving myself for letting this swarm happen because we were leaving for vacation, and it's part of my education, right? I had one really big hive, cub, who I split into 3 different hives. The one that has cub, because she's queen, they're queened and they're happy, they'll probably make me honey. They'll make me honey. I don't know how much. The one that swarmed took my experienced queen. So the rest of that hive is requeening. And then I have the other 2 hives from cub that are requeening, but they're all going to be a month behind because they don't have a queen right now, and they're still doing stuff, but they're not as active as they would be if they were happy and queened. And they call it queen right. If you ever heard the word queen right, that means your colony has a queen. So I've only got 1 queen right now, and the others are on their way, I hope, the other 3.
So then, considering the cost on how much you put into this.
You want a $100 pint of honey?
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, I honestly, no, I didn't. And when I first...
Go for the honey, so how long before you see the results of...
It should be from now on, I mean, from this
So
year
2 or
on.
3 years?
No, I should get some this year. I don't know if I'll have enough to sell. One guy told me I should have 100 pounds of honey. I don't know. But everybody's got an opinion. And I should get some this year, and I'll give you some. The people that have suffered along with me get some free honey to start. It is expensive. It is an expensive hobby. I'll not lie to you. I've probably put $2,000 into this hobby, but I love it. And what else am I doing? I retired, and it's my life now.
How often do you clean your?
I'm so glad you said that. I don't at all. So this frame, I'm going to leave this up here if anybody wants to come and look at it. I have it bagged because it's messy. So this drone frame I put in the refrigerator or freezer, froze it, they're dead. I put it back in the hive, and they clean it. The girls clean it out.
The ones in there all be cleaned by the bees?
They will. Those are new frames. Those are new frames. But if they clean it out, they'll leave the wax there. But they'll clean out the dead mites and drones. But they're extremely. I don't worry about taking a lick of honey every once in a while because they're so clean. The only thing that I have to do to maintain is just to maintain the structures of the frame and make sure that they, that I'm able to, see if you notice on this side, on either side is an ear, there's a part of the box here that this lays on, and sometimes these get worn very easily because I'm literally cracking them open with the hive tool to be able to pull them up because the propolis just sticks to everything. It does its job. And did I tell you that it comes from the wood, a wound on a tree? Like you have a maple tree, you have sap, you're under your car, under a maple tree. That's what it is. It's the sap from trees. That's the propolis. So, did you have a question? Yes.
Is there an ideal location in the yard?
Really good question. You want, in the winter especially, you want to be facing south because you don't want the north wind coming into the hive. So you want them facing north. You want them in a sunny-ish location. Mine's sun and shade, but it's pretty okay. And I would say, how far out are the hives, Jim? 20 yards from the house? Maybe, yeah. And that when they were getting aggressive this summer, I was thinking, I got to move them back further, but I can't. Our property's not that big. We have 1/4 acre. And my neighbors, if you're thinking about doing it, check with your neighbors because you want to make friends with them. You want to give them honey. And the one neighbor was a little afraid because of swarms, and the other neighbor was really all about it. In fact, they made their yard in clover this year for us. Yeah, that's a really good neighbor. But you know what? Interestingly enough, my mentor said to me, I was a little worried because I don't have a lot of land. We're in Menor. We're in Pine Gate, right? So she said, look around you. We were at her hives. She has less than I do in Cleveland Heights. And she said, I don't see bees around here because they literally go out. They go up and out. I do see them sometimes around this year because there's more of them. I saw them on my myrtle in early spring and such. But I don't feel like there's more that big of a deal. Nobody's complaining about it. Now, the one thing though, if you have a neighbor who has a pool, they love chlorinated water, so they will come to a chlorinated water area and drown because they drown really easily. If that's one thing you could do as gardeners for all the insects, not only the bees, but you know how dry we've been. I was really worried while I was gone that my bees were going to not have water, so I bought a chicken feeder and I put it in the backyard, but you put sticks and stuff in it because they just don't know how to swim. They drown really easy. So if you want to put water out for the insects, all the insects and the bees, just make sure I put out a tray, put a bunch of sticks in it. I even had to put sticks in my bird bath because they keep going in there. And if they have a stick to stand on as they drink, they don't usually drown. But so did I answer your question? Yes, sun, shade, not too close to people and I keep telling my neighbors, if they're coming after you, please tell me because, again, I'm a newbie. Once I split that hive, there was no aggression. I mean, they're so calm. I could go in with just my hands and not my gloves, but learning. Anybody else?
You have any idea, you said one of them swarmed, do you have any idea where they went?
No. I wish I did. I got a call from Sally saying, I think somebody has a swarm, and do you want it? And I said, no, I've got too many bees right now. But swarms are great to catch because they really usually make really good hives because they're eager to get going again. The queen's usually laying like crazy, and they're really calm because they're working to set up a new house.
How would you catch one?
It's pretty easy, actually. One of my other mentors, well, there's a smell. There's a thing you can put up in a tree. Actually, I was down in South Carolina. I met a woman who, just by accident, we became fast friends because we're both beekeepers. I wound up going to a bee conference in South Carolina and staying in her mother's house with her. I mean, it was like, some things make you instantaneous friends. There was a commercial beekeeper that stuck his hives in this field in South Carolina. So she put bee traps in the trees all around them to be able to trap their swarms to get them. But my friend in Fairport Harbor, the one I was saying about, she got called on 2 or 3 this year in Eastlake, and they were up in a tree, and all she did was had a hive underneath, and the thing was about 12 feet up, and she just banged the branch, and they fell down into the hive, and she took it away, because they're in survival mode, and actually there's times when I'm trying to get bees off a frame, and you just go like this, and they fall off, and they're okay, They don't get mad about the things you'd think they get mad at. They don't get mad about me cutting the drones out. It's more about fast movement and sound. Literally, when I'm picking up a frame, I'm trying to crack it, not make a noise, and I'm picking it up like this. And once I'm up here, I can do anything to this frame, and they're just like going about their business. It's really about movement. And my big last year, Jim would always yell to me, "Go slow, be quiet." Okay. Yeah, he stays behind the screen.
So do you build up an immunity since you were stung so many times? Does that build up or nothing? No.
And I still have arthritis, and I don't know, I didn't have a lot of arthritis, so I can't say for sure, because they do say it does help with that. My sister's going to come and stick her hand in the hive, she said, but no, no, she's not going to. I'm not going to let her. But no, I get a reaction for about 3 days. I get swollen, and I've tried there's a lot of people that say a lot of things about what'll work, and I've tried them all, and they haven't worked to help reduce it. It's just ice, and it's just a nuisance, Yes, Jim?
What's the advantage of local honey?
Oh, that's a good question. Thank you. Your honey that you buy at the store is usually a mixture. It's not usually pure from one hive. And the hives that are local are helpful to you for any allergies you might have, because they contain the pollens and things that you might have a sensitivity to. And by ingesting it in small amounts, you've heard that about peanut butter, right? They can feed peanut butter to a kid who's severely allergic to it a little bit each day, and their immune system just finally recognizes it, and they don't have the problem. It's the same thing with seasonal allergies. If you take local honey, it's got the pollen and the proteins in it that you can potentially improve. That's one thing I do think is true. I think that's been scientifically proven. But the ones you get in the store, they may taste okay, but they're usually a mixture of different types and qualities of honey. Sally?
What's the big deal about royal honey?
About what?
Royal honey?
Oh, royal jelly?
Royal jelly?
Yeah, my nephew was just telling me he saw a thing on Cambodia where they're collecting royal jelly and using it for, I don't know.
Kinds of things, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's what the queen gets fed. Royal jelly her the whole time when she's growing. And the bees get it to begin with in their first stages, but then not. I don't know. I mean, it must contain some pretty good substances.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to ask about Manuka honey from New Zealand. We brought some back, but we haven't tried it yet.
Well, since that was the last question, we never get to find out about Manuka honey.
I don't know a whole lot. I just know I got it.
Cliffhanger.
Well, it's It's got medicinal properties that that I need to explore more, but it was very expensive.
Oil is supposed to be.
Manuka honey, like if you had a small cut on your hand,
Yes,
you put a little bit on it, and it helps it heal real fast.
right.
Or faster.
No, you're right. As a nurse, we used them on wounds a lot, and they really made a difference. Really made a difference. But I need to investigate how, like if he gets a sore throat, can I give it to him and stuff like that. So it's interesting. Another thing I got to look at.
I would like to say thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.